Tonight, we're going to be continuing in our series, Supreme, which we have been going through the book of Hebrews. It's a book in the New Testament of your Bible. There's been a lot of conversations about who people think wrote this book. I'm going to tell you right now, much smarter people than me can't agree on it, so we've just kind of taken the posture of the author of Hebrews, whoever that might be, has been basically making the case and unpacking for this group of Jewish Christians, this group of Hebrew Christians in this part of the world at the time, making the case for what we would call the supremacy of Jesus. Basically, what he is saying is Jesus is supreme. So what he has been saying throughout this entire book so far is Jesus is over all things because Jesus is God. And it was a very interesting truth for them to kind of grip a hold of, because the group who was being written to, the receiving audience of this book, had heard for years, their granddaddies had told them stories of this Messiah that was coming to rescue and redeem humanity. And finally, Jesus shows up and he's like, oh, BT Dub, that's me. And then he starts doing ridiculous things. I mean, he starts turning water into wine. He's feeding thousands of people. He's raising people from the dead. He's healing blind people. I mean, he's just doing incredible things. And then on top of all that, all these signs that he's doing that say, hey, I'm God, then he just comes out and says it. It's me, and this is what I'm doing. And then he goes to the cross, and then he does what no other person in the history of the world has or will ever do, which is come back to life. And then he gives his followers, what we call disciples, this charge. And he tells them, I want you to go reach people with the gospel, with this message of me. And so these churches had been birthed in these different places. But you had this kind of new movement, so to speak. See, religion had been around for a long time, Judaism, and obviously people who believed in God, and they would have temples and tabernacles, and they would believe that Jesus was coming. And then Jesus comes and says, look, here is the church. This is called the way. In fact, that's what they were called initially in the New Testament, were followers of the way. The term Christian actually didn't come about for a little while, and it was a derogatory term. You may not know that, but it was. It was actually meant to be kind of a jab at people who followed Jesus. They called them Christians, which translated into little Jesuses, which they were like, this is a bunch of Jesus juniors. It was a kind of a derogatory term. And that's kind of how it became. But this idea that Jesus was God really gave fullness to what you and I know as Christianity. It came to fruition through the person and work of Jesus on the cross and out of the tomb. And so the author has spent chapter after chapter in this book communicating to these Christians. Understand, I know this is something you guys got to get a hold of, because I know you believe in Jesus, but you really need to let it invade your space and consume your life. You really need to get it, because it changes everything. Why? Jesus changes everything because Jesus is over everything, because Jesus is God. That's been the message that he's been presenting. And this week is no different. In fact, he's going to say some things. We're going to read some things. I'm just going to throw this disclaimer out, and then I'm going to read it so we can unpack it together. It's going to sound a little funky to all of us. It's just going to. It's going to sound funky because he's going to use kind of an analogy or an illustration, whatever you want to call it there, it's just going to sound like, what? So go with me in Hebrews chapter 5, if you have your phone or your Bible, or we will have it on the screen as we always do. In Hebrews chapter 5, starting in verse 11, listen to what he says. He says this, about this we have much to say, and it's hard to explain. What he's talking about is everything I've just shared. Is he's going in on Jesus is greater than Moses. Remember, Moses was this kind of Mount Rushmore of Mount Rushmore persons in Christianity for Hebrew Christians. They would have known Moses. I mean, 10 Commandments, kind of a big deal. They even made a VeggieTales about him. I mean, super, super big deal. he's coming in and saying, look, Jesus is greater than Moses. Then he says Jesus is the new high priest, the priest who would kind of be the mediator between people and God, kind of the go-between. And he's like, no, Jesus is the new high priest and he's perfect. And he's just going hard and hard. And he's like, look, I have a lot to say about this. We've got a lot to say about this. And it's hard to explain. And this is where he takes the glove off and quapow to everybody. Like an old duel, right? He's just kind of poof, boom. This is where he gives them. And then he starts talking about weird stuff. Listen to what he says. But it's hard to explain since you have become dull of hearing. Basically, that's him giving, I don't know if you've seen the movie Back to the Future, but he's basically giving him the whole, hello, McFly. He's giving him one of those. He's like, look, we got a lot to say, but you're not going to understand it because you've grown dull of hearing. Listen, for though by this time you ought to be teachers. By this time, you've heard us teach you so much about Jesus. You should be teaching other people. But no, now you need someone to teach you. It's like, look, you should be the experts, but you need to be the one sitting in the learning seat. You need to be the one sitting in the school circle. Join around, boys and girls. You're number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way up to 20. Join around in our kindergarten school circle. You should be the teacher, but no, you're like Billy Madison sitting in a room with a bunch of little kids. Okay, teach me. He's just giving it to them. He's like, you should be teachers, but no, you need somebody to teach you again the basic principles of the oracles of God. Oracles is just this big kind of sci-fi fantasy movie word that we see here that basically just means the basic tenets of the Christian faith that you would find in the Old Testament of the Gospel. How it kind of intersects. He's like, look, this is who God is. This is who Jesus is. This is basic. Jesus is God. Look, you need somebody to teach you these all over again. Look at what he says. He says, because you need milk. It's like that old video, right? He needs some milk. It's kind of one of those, right? You're like, yeah, some of y'all got that. You're like, oh my, he did not just break that. Yes, this is what he says. He says, look, you need milk, not solid food. For everyone who lives on milk is unskilled in the word of righteousness, since he is a child. But solid food is for the mature, for those who have their powers of discernment. Ooh, this is brilliant. Trained by constant practice to distinguish good from evil. Here we have the author of Hebrews saying, look, I've been teaching y'all a lot about Jesus being God, but you are not picking up what I'm putting down. You should be teaching others, but you're not, because you've grown dull of hearing it. And you cannot handle the food I am feeding you anymore, so it's time for you to break out the baby bottle and get something. Because you're not ready for this. And you're not ready for this because you've grown dull of hearing it. I can remember a decade ago when our daughter was learning to walk. Kids, when they're infants, right, they drink formula, they drink milk, like you just kind of just plop them right here and give them a bottle, and you try to go on about your business. You learn to do a lot of things with one hand when you have an infant, or maybe you just put them on a pillow and kind of do your thing, or however that works. And so, but they start to grow, and they start to move, and they start to do things for themselves, and then they start to eat different foods. And you start to feed them things like oatmeal, or you take, peas, squash, all kinds of vegetables that, quite honestly, once they get to age 5, they don't want to eat them anymore. You know they're not going to eat them, and you know they're not going to eat them for like 20 years, and so you take advantage of that opportunity when they're like 1 and 2, and you take every nasty vegetable you can find, and you squish it up and squish it up and squish it up, and you shove it in their face. And that's when you see the old and parents looking like idiots trying to feed their kids, and it's all over their face, and it's all over you. No shirt is clean as a dad with like a 1 or a 2-year-old kid. And I can remember we would go places with Hope, and our friends, we were in that season of life where some of our friends who were married had kids and some did not have kids. And the questions that people ask you when you have kids but they don't have kids, the questions that people ask you are really stupid. The things that are said to you when you are kind of raising a baby into a toddler, and your friends and people in your life have not done that, they say the dumbest things to you. You just, they'll look at you and say, oh, how sweet is it to have a baby? And you're like, man, I love this kid. I've never loved another human being like I love this kid. I could not imagine life without this kid. She is precious. She is beautiful. And then your friend looks at you and like, oh, that's exactly how I feel about my Shih Tzu. She's my baby. And you're like, that's a dog, not a person. It's not the same. No offense to dog lovers. We have two. We love them. But that's not the same. Like, people will say things to you and you're like, no, it's really not. Like a dog, you don't have to and feed nasty, gross peas to a dog. You just put some food in a bowl and they eat it, right? Like, come on now. That's not the same thing. And then also, they say stupid things to you. Like, literally, I can remember we would go places and our friends would ask us, they would say, is she still on the bottle or is she eating people food? And I was like, what? People food? Did you just ask me if I'm planning on feeding my kid people food? No, we were going to find some non-human food to feed this human. And their face is like, I don't get it. And I'm like, you just asked, like, people ask that, because I said it too, and a lot of you guys were just like, wait, hold on. And it took you a minute to be like, oh, that's right, we do. You know why? Because we just assume that a little baby, they don't eat people food. But what we mean is like regular people food. But the way it comes out is people food. And you just kind of, I remember like looking at Robin and just being kind of, did they just say that? People food? I'd be like, nah. And it would mess with them, right? Like, no, like we like puppy chow because we got a dog and it eats puppy chow. You know, it's the same as having a baby. I don't know if you know that. It's basically the same, right? I mean, they say just like stupid things to you, man. People say stupid things to you when you're raising like a little kid. But I can remember with Hope specifically, I mean, the journey of going from like a bottle to she was eating real food to I remember the day that she ate like a chicken nugget for the first time. Oh my goodness. I mean, I beat my chest like a warrior. I was so proud of my kid because she took her little tiny finger, her little chubby hand, and reached down and picked up a piece of chicken nugget and put it right in her mouth and spit it right back out like every other kid did. But she tried. I can remember being you know why I was so excited for her? Because she was eating solid food. Now, I don't even make her food for her. She gets up in the morning and she cooks her own breakfast. She makes her own breakfast. Why? Because she has grown. See, a lot of us never even get to that step of picking up a piece of chicken nugget, much less making our own breakfast. Because why? Because we've grown dull of hearing the gospel and its power in our lives. But here's what I know. And here's what I think we're gonna draw out. Here's where I think we're gonna pull out our spiritual ice cream scooper and scoop right on out of the text this week. Here's where I think we're gonna go. You ready? I think everybody in this recent season, as we're kind of exiting this season that was unlike any other for any of us in our lifetimes, we're all coming out of this season having pressed pause on a lot of things in life. And when you press pause and the world kind of shuts down, it gives you time to think. And it gives you time to think about what matters most in this life. And then it gives you time to think of what you value most in this life. How do I spend my time in this life? And you kind of start doing a self-inventory of what has been. And then you start asking this big important question that a lot of us are asking, especially as we're kind of funneling out of this last season together. And it is this: where do we go from here? A lot of us are kind of asking that. Where do we go from here? Because this season of life has been nuts. It has brought more emotions than I even knew I could probably interact with. Where do we go from here? But I want to submit to you a follow-up question to ask in tandem with that I think is going to change the movement patterns in your life. Because I don't think it's enough for us to just ask this question, where do we go from here? I want to give you a second question to follow up. If you're a note taker, this one's for you, and here it is for everybody. You ready for question 2 that just pairs? I mean, it's like peanut butter and jelly, peanut butter and chocolate, peanut butter with a flip-flop. I mean, peanut butter kind of does a lot of things, right? It just goes, right? Here it is. How do we grow from here? Don't just stop at where do we go from here, but follow it up with how do we grow from here? Because one of those questions is about direction, but the other one is about the work it takes to move in that direction. One of those questions is about the destination. The other one is about the discipline it will take to get to that destination. Do you understand what I'm saying? One of them says, where? The other one says, how? What am I going to do? What am I going to do? How am I going to lace up my shoes and move in God's direction? Because there's some dangers for us, just like there were dangers to these Hebrew Christians who the author is writing to. He says, you've grown dull of hearing. There were hurdles in their lives. Listen to what he says. He says, look, I've got a lot to say, but it's hard to explain because you've become dull of hearing. What does he say? You've become dull of hearing. That's not overnight. So they were up against things. They were up against doubt. They were up against cultural, sociological, political, all sorts of things going on within the societies in which they resided, where these churches were set up. They dealt with so many things. There was relative truth that was being valued over God's truth. There was personal preferences that were being valued over God's way. There were so many things going on, and they had become dull of hearing the gospel because they were rooted in the culture they were in, and so they were living according to that. And that's what was happening, because we get hurdles like that all the time. Some of us think, oh, I can't get much from this book that was written a few thousand years ago. Man, they're encountering the same kind of stuff that we do now. Because we all have hurdles. Because we ask that question, where do we go from here? And then all more important, we ask, how do we grow from here? And then a lot of us start to list out, I want to grow, but. And we put this big spiritual but right there. Right there. I want to grow, but what about this? Because there are just hurdles everywhere. And this isn't one of those, hey, come to the free ice cream shop and listen to Jesus and it's all roses. No, life is real. Life is real. That's what the author of Hebrews says. You've grown dull of hearing. Why? Because life has challenges. And we all have different hurdles. Recently, they have been showing what are called the Olympic trials. The Olympics are coming up. I love watching the Olympics, and I love watching the Olympic trials. Specifically, I love watching the track and field Olympic trials and Olympic events, because the idea of an individual who can run that fast is incredible to me. The idea of an individual who can take a big Mario bomb looking rock and put it on their shoulder and spin around like crazy and loft it into the air further than I can probably throw a rock with my bare hands that weighs a third of the amount is insane to me. The fact that somebody can take one of those big crazy spear looking sticks and just run up into something, jab it into the ground and loft themselves over is just superhero-esque to me. I love watching these things. I'm fascinated by watching these things. And like any good dad who wants to drill down things in his kids, I make them watch it with me. And they're completely uninterested. They do not care. My son would rather watch Pokemon videos, and my daughter would rather watch The Descendants. She does not care, and he does not care. But I'm trying to raise these kids, and I control the remote control to the Apple TV, so they have to watch them with me. And so I've been making them watch these track and field videos with me. And we were watching the hurdles the other day. And it was the 200 or 100 meter hurdles. And so it is not only do these runners have to run and jump, they have to leap over these things that if you don't do it, you run into it, and it's pretty painful. Oh, and also you lose. And so you have to leap over these hurdles. But you also have to run faster than most human beings alive. And then leap over that. I mean, it's just incredible to see what's going on. And our son asked me the other day, we were watching him, and I'm showing him clips, and then, of course, we went down this deep dive into watching all these Usain Bolt videos because I wanted him to see the fastest man on earth, and it was just, we kind of did this. But he looks at me, and he knows, he was like, Dad, you run. Like, they know Dad works out, and he's like, Dad, you go for runs. Can you run that fast? And I just kind of looked at him, and I was just like, is your mom around? He was like, no. I was like, yeah, I can run that fast. Yeah, I can. But it made me think, I mean, seriously, I had this, I literally, it brought this thought, this weird thought you get while watching videos with your kids. I literally thought to myself, what would it look like if I did get out there and try to run with these Olympic athletes? Have you ever thought about that? Maybe you don't, maybe I'm a weirdo and I just think these things, but I wonder what it would look like just to put a normal person out there at the Olympics. You got 10 people out there to run, just add a lane. Just add a lane and put somebody, just pick a person from the audience and be like, would you like to participate? We'll give you a medal. You can get your picture taken with the winner. We'll even give you a free Gatorade, right? Like, I mean, hey, come on, run. Can you imagine what that would look like? I mean, you see, because they pan everybody, right? And they've all got their, you know what I mean? They're kissing their necklaces. They're stretching, right? They're doing their things. They're giving their signs, right? You know, whatever. Everybody looking, doing my thing. Some of them are just like, you know, they're just in it, right? And if you got them, and then you get to like average Joe, and they're just kind of like, just glad to be here. Just glad to be here. And they all get in their setup, right? And they're just, I mean, they got the shoes, and you got somebody who's just like wearing a pair of Skechers, just kind of out there like, hey, what's up? Hey, what's up? Am I good? Oh, okay, what are they doing? Oh, yep, okay. Boom, and the whistle goes, and they just go, and this person's like, oh, shoot, okay. You imagine seeing what, like an average Joe running with the Olympic, especially if you put hurdles into it. Can you imagine that? You just get up there, you just kind of like, I mean, you can just see him just be like, let me, okay. Hey, yes! And they're like, dude, you got 8 more. Oh, okay. It's like a mercy rule right at that point. It's nuts. Like, I think of that, but then I think of us as followers of Jesus, and I think, man, there are hurdles in our lives. There are hurdles in our lives where sometimes we want to be a sprinter, but we feel like the average Joe in his Skechers trying to go out there and run with the Olympic athletes. Why? Sometimes it's because we've grown dull of hearing the transforming message and power of the gospel of Jesus Christ. We've grown dull. Do you know what that word dull means when it says, because if you're like me, you hear it, and I think you've grown dull of hearing. I would think that means, oh, it's dull, like it's boring. That's not actually what that word means. When it was written originally, what that word actually means is it essentially means there's no push. There's no drive. There's no movement. What he's saying is you've become stuck. There's no rev in your engine anymore. Your spiritual engine is out of gas because you let it go to E, and you watched it go to E, and you watched it go to E, and you watched it go past E, and you drifted and drifted and drifted, and now there's just no go in you. That's what he's saying. You have lost your drive to move in God's direction. That is what he's saying. It's not that you've grown bored of the gospel. You're a big fan of the gospel. You love it. You support it. You admire it. You cheer it on. You put your big foam finger and you wave it. Yay, Jesus, #1 fan. You're there. You're there. But the push, the drive to follow him up close and in person is not there anymore because you're stuck behind the hurdles of life. And so your spiritual engine is out of gas. There's no push. There's no push. So it loses its grip on your life. We usually think there's a negative connotation when we think something has a grip on us, but you want the gospel to have a grip on you, because if the gospel has a grip on you, it leads you. And you want that grip on you to be tight. Because if it doesn't, you start to wander. And that's what he's saying. He's saying, you've grown dull. You should be here, but you're not. So let's break it down some more, because I want to stoke this fire in you. I want you to be where you need to be. I have a buddy of mine who serves in the Special Forces in the U.S. Navy, and I can remember him telling me a story of him going through a training called BUDS. It's a school basically where they make Navy SEALs, and he would talk to me about the attrition rate of how many people quit that you show up with this many and this many graduate. Has the highest attrition rate of anything out there. I mean, most people quit and never make it through. And he would say it was interesting because they tried to study the psychology of it and the different types of people who succeed and make it through and don't. And he said there's no real rhyme or reason. You've got tall people, short people, athletic people, non-athletic people, people who are educated, people who are uneducated. The diversity range across people who succeed through becoming this is so wide. He said, but the one factor that is always predictable with people who quit is it's never just a snap decision. It's always something that gets in their mind and sticks in their mind. It's always something where they get a little bit of a doubt. He said, maybe you're running, carrying a log, maybe you're doing push-ups, maybe you're running in the beach, maybe you're pulling a boat over your head, maybe you're trying to swim for a mile or whatever it is, and something creeps in there, this doubt that says, I don't know if I can do this. Maybe I should quit. And they never quit there. He says, well, just maybe, but let's see if I can make it through the next thing. So they get into the next thing and that gets tough and they're like, man, this is tough. Maybe I should quit. And what he says is what happens is this thought starts to fester and it starts to kind of grow. And eventually they hit a point where that thought consumes all their thoughts and they eventually quit because the attrition rate is so high and they've wanted to know why and it just creeps in there. It creeps in there. You know what it does? You know what it does to them? He says, this is what happens. And he told me this and I've never forgotten this. He said, because they forgot why they were there in the first place. How did they forget why they were there? They became dull to it. The engine didn't have any gas. They had lost the push. They had lost the drive. Do you understand what I'm saying? This is so big because in our world today, our culture tells us to take the values of Christianity, to take the value of following Jesus, to take the priority of following Jesus, to take the pursuit of following Jesus and move it to the back burner. It is no longer on the priority list of our lives because our culture has gradually just kind of moved the importance of faith off to the side because we have decided that we will focus on me, not he. And what happens is we see our world start to turn upside down. Why? Not because of external factors, but because of internal factors. Because when we live a life that is devoted to serving ourselves, we no longer serve others. So we no longer see others the way God sees them. So we no longer treat others the way God sees people. And so we see people hurting people all the time. Why? It starts right here with us. Because we've grown dull to hearing the transforming power of the gospel. But I think there are three things that create hurdles for us. And you may plot yourself in one of these three areas that all of us tend to interact with. One, I think one of those hurdles is I don't know how to grow. Maybe you're in that boat. It's like, man, it's just limited knowledge. I just don't have that much interaction with the Word of God. I'm kind of new to this Christianity thing, and I don't really know. Maybe that's a real hurdle for you. Maybe the second hurdle for some of us is, I don't have the push. I just don't have the push. I'm kind of apathetic to it. I'm kind of just stuck. I don't want to be stuck, but I'm kind of just stuck. And so it's not limited knowledge. I'm just kind of lazy in my efforts because, believe it or not, to be a disciple of Jesus takes discipline following Jesus. And what we do is we wait for our feelings to catch up to us so then we can take action. But no, feelings follow action. Action doesn't follow feelings. That's not how it works. And maybe hurdle number 3 for some of us is no, I know enough, so I'm good on the growth thing. See, I encounter that with Christians a lot. It's always what other people aren't doing to follow Jesus, but it's never what I should be doing to follow him more closely. Have you ever encountered people like that? Sometimes we read the Bible and we read it like it's a window, not a mirror. We read the Bible and we're like, oh, he or she should really have heard that verse. Maybe you pull your phone out and you do your devotion in the morning, you pull out a verse, you're like, oh, that person on the internet should have heard that. That person on Twitter should have heard that. She should have heard that. He should have heard that. You're treating the Bible like a window. You're just looking through other people, not like a mirror. What are you teaching me, God, about you? See, sometimes we do that, right? We get kind of we lack the awareness and the maturity to want to pursue Jesus. Do you know what happens there? I'm going to give you a big theological statement. Big one. Let's dust off the old seminary degrees. Let's pull them out of the garage. Dust them off. Break it out. Here's a big old theological phrase for everybody in the room that's going to stick with you. You ready for this? Here's where it is. Most Christians who struggle with growing in their faith because of a lack of awareness or maturity do so because they're arrogant. You ready for that? That may sound harsh to a lot of people, but it's because we read the Bible and we think, well, I'm already there. Let's just keep this very, 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 very real. That is dangerous. That is dangerous. You know why? Growing dull is gradual and it's dangerous. It happens over time and it sets us in a posture where every bit of our passion gets depleted. And we start to just feel almost weak and helpless and apathetic. And what happens is our arrogance turns to despair because we thought we were here, so we got comfortable with where we were, and our push was taken away. And before you know it, we've just drifted, and we think, how did I get here? Maybe you've been there. Maybe you know somebody who's there. Maybe you've had conversations with somebody who said, oh, man, I did this, and I did this. And you're like, man, how'd you get there? I have no idea. I don't know how it got that bad. I don't know how we got there because you grew dull. The push wasn't there. I see so many Christians who are educated beyond their level of obedience. They know a lot about the Bible, but they don't do anything with it. How many of us have struggled with that? You ready for this? Because here's the big theological tagline. Here it is. Biblical information without personal transformation leads to spiritual constipation. Did he just say constipation? Yep. It's in there, but it's not going anywhere. We don't do anything with it. We read the Bible and we say, great, check that box, but God, don't invade my space. And God says, no. I'm here to take over because I want what's best for you. What does he say at the end in verse 14? Solid food is for the mature. Listen. For those who have their powers of discernment trained by constant practice to distinguish good from evil. There is a purpose for what he's writing here. We learn to live God's way, and we learn his definition of our best life. We hear that phrase all the time, living your best life. But see, our definition of our best life is a dangerous definition because it's rooted in selfishness. And when it's rooted in selfishness, it's all about me. And it distracts me from the fullness of a relationship with God. But God's definition of our best for our lives is rooted in service. It's actually where we find purpose in this life. It's where we find peace in this life. It's where we find fulfillment in this life. It's where we find truth in this life. It's through a relationship with God. He says you need to practice. It's powerful. You notice that he says that? They have powers of discernment. They are able to walk in God's direction because of, what does it say? Trained by constant practice to distinguish good from evil. What happens when we grow dull to the work of the gospel in our lives is we miss out on the richness of a growing relationship with Jesus. A growing relationship with Jesus. one that is pushing forward, that hasn't lost its push. Because, see, we will never, ever experience the richness of a relationship with Jesus when we admire him from the cheap seats instead of following him up close. Because relationship with God is built up close and over time. And when we just admire him from the cheap seats, our passion petrifies. And we grow dull in hearing the work of the gospel in our lives. Don't run that risk, because it's gradual, but it's dangerous. It just happens. Well, I don't know that I really need to read the Bible. I can just listen to somebody else talk about it. And then that comes into, I don't know that I need to go listen to somebody else talk about the Bible, because, I kind of know what it says. And then that leads to, I don't really need to be around other people who believe in Jesus, because I believe in Jesus. So I'm just going to do my own thing. And then that leads into, yeah, I know I should be gracious with people. I know I should forgive people. I know I should be kind to people. I know I should point people to Jesus with the way I live my life. But people are stupid, and I don't want to treat them that way because I'm angry at them. And I'd rather just talk bad about them on the internet with my thumbs and just ignore them in real life and just kind of move on about, yeah, I know that God says these things, but I don't like the things that God says. And so I'm just not really going to jive with those anymore. And I'm just kind of going to think, well, this is what I think, and what I think is more important than what God says. And before you know it, we've gradually drifted and become dull to the power of God. And it's dangerous. Why is it dangerous? Because God wants better for us. He wants better for you. He knows better, and he wants better for you, because he knows that his best is the route to freedom. But we never experience the fullness of God if we don't learn to feed ourselves with the nourishment of his word, or the gathering of his people, or the worship of his name. You want to know how to be filled up in this life? Pour out. It's counterintuitive, I know. Dig in and pour out. That's how you get filled up. And so what he is saying is, listen, if you want the powers of discernment to understand and distinguish between good and evil, if you want to grow, if you don't want to be stuck in infancy, but if you want to grow. You ever seen a child grow? Our son, his best friend, was at the house, and he has two little brothers. This weekend, we were having a birthday party, and his two little brothers are like 3 and 4. And they ran everywhere. They did a 10K in my living room. I watched them. I just watched them. It was like NASCAR for toddlers. It was just, that's what it was. I watched them. You know why? Because when they hit a certain age, they're ready to go. Some of us are stuck waddling through the hurdles, still going back and forth between solid food and milk, but really what we want is we just want to eat a big old cheeseburger and take off running like a 3-year-old through my living room. That's what God wants for you. He wants you to be able to grow in your faith. Because the more you grow in your faith, the stronger you get, the more rooted you get in him. So when life gets real and life gets hard and stuff comes up, you don't wonder, or worry as much. You wait, worship, and work on his best for your life. So learn what God has to say. Learn why he says it. Learn why that matters for your life. Learn how to live it out. And as you live like Jesus is who he says he is, he's going to draw you closer to him.